I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 219, How to Stop Yelling. If your husband is struggling with a pornography problem and you want some help with it and you are not finding the resources that you like, you are in the right place. My name is Jolene Wynn. I am a certified life coach. I am an active member of the LDS faith, and I am the wife of a former porn addict. And on this podcast, I am going to share with you the tools that you need in order to start your healing journey. This is where I'm going to show you how to dive deep into intentional living, how to rekindle connection with your spouse, how to manage all that emotional turmoil that you're feeling, how to break the addiction cycle that you have to your husband's addiction, and tell you all of the ways to do that and start healing. I am so glad that you're here, and I can't wait to get started. Let's go. All right, my ladies, welcome back to the podcast. How are you guys doing? Are you having a great day? Can you believe that it's August already? I can't believe that it's August already. I know that seems crazy. I feel like our summer has gone by so fast. And I hope, and I already know that my sister's kids in Tennessee are starting school this week, which seems crazy, which we homeschool. So we have actually been doing school all summer. When we did our cross-country trip, then we took a little bit of a break. We didn't bring the school stuff with us for those 3 weeks. So I guess that was our summer break. We've just kept going. And in fact, my husband speaks Spanish. And so he just started adding Spanish into our curriculum, which I tried to do last year, but I don't speak Spanish. So he has started doing that with the kids this week, and it has been super fun. I've been trying to get him to do this since we decided to have children because I thought it would be so helpful and beneficial for our kids to learn another language, to speak it, to be familiar with it. But he was the one that was always at work. So I mean, they were around me all day. If I had spoken another language, I could have taught them both, but I only speak one language, and now he is home and teaching them, and it has been super, super fun to hear them. And one of my kids in particular, Georgia, she has a real affinity for hearing languages, and she can mimic, and she can do all the accents, and she can do all of those things, and she hears language in a different way, and it is so fun to see her just really dive into it, and it's been really fun. So that has been the week at our house, and I hope you guys are allowing yourself to relax, even though it's the end of summer, and as you get back into the swing of things for school, I know it can be really stressful. So good luck with all of that. And if you want help, come join me. I'll help you. In fact, I wanted to tell you guys, I am actually doing a free coaching call. For those of you guys who are not in my program yet and are curious about what the difference is between the podcast and coaching, I want to invite you to come to this call. It is going to be, let me get the dates here. The free coaching call that I am doing, let me make sure that I have this correct for you guys. Okay, is on August 14th. Okay, I'm doing a free coaching call on August 14th. I will put the link in the show notes so that you can just go ahead and sign up right there from the show notes. This call is, again, completely free, and what it looks like is you're going to be able to come, log on, and be able to get help with whatever it is that you're struggling with. So if you are struggling with some back to school stress, then bring that to the call and I'll help you. And you can either go on video, not go on video. You can come and just listen and see what coaching is like. This will give you an idea of what it's like inside my program, and also give you the opportunity to experience coaching and what it's like to actually implement what you're learning on the podcast. So if you've never come to a coaching call with me, I would highly recommend that you come to this call on August 14th. Again, that link will be in the show notes so that you can really take what you're learning on the podcast and start implementing it in a way that you can start to transform your life rather than just learn about it intellectually. Especially if there's something that you've learned about a lot, but it keeps coming back up. If you keep finding yourself struggling with the same thought, the same emotion, the same pattern, come to this call and I will help you, okay? The other thing I wanted to let you guys know is I am doing an anger management masterclass. I have had so many messages recently from clients and non-clients alike who are struggling with anger. And so I want to do a deep dive into this. If you guys are unfamiliar, my masterclasses I teach inside my coaching program, but I open up a few spots for those of you who aren't clients to be able to come and join just for that week if this is a topic that you know is something that you want help with, that you struggle with. And even though I'm calling it anger management, It's not about how to manage your anger. I'm not going to teach you how to manage it. You guys are actually managing it just fine. What I'm going to teach you is how to diffuse it so that your anger is no longer running your life, but that you are the one in control. Okay, so this anger management masterclass is going to be August 19th to the 21st. And again, I'll put that link in the show notes as well. So this is, again, a class that you can come join just for the week. You'll get access to the program. You'll be able to join my coaching program for the week for this masterclass. Not only will you be able to join live, get all the material, and get that one-on-one help, you'll also get access to the replays. So joining for that week is $99. Again, I'll put the link in the show notes, but if you know that this is calling to you, then sign up today because, again, we're only taking a few spots, okay? And that brings me right into today's topic, which is how to stop yelling, okay? So many of us, and I include myself in this because I used to struggle with this so much, yell. And we don't like that we yell. And this was one of the things that really actually got me interested in coaching in the first place was I just wanted to stop yelling at my kids. I knew that I was frustrated with my kids. I could hear myself yelling, and yet I didn't know how to stop it. And every time I yelled, I had this intense regret afterward. It wasn't how I wanted to show up. I didn't want to be a mom who yelled at her kids all the time. And even though logically I understood that I shouldn't be yelling, and even though logically I knew that I didn't want to be yelling, I couldn't seem to stop myself. It's kind of like, I remember my sister telling me one time that she did natural childbirth one time. One of her babies came too fast. She didn't get an epidural in time, and she did it natural. And she said she could hear herself screaming, kind of as an out-of-body experience, but she couldn't stop it. And sometimes I feel like that's what it's like. When we are full of anger or frustration and we're yelling, we can hear ourselves yelling. We know it's not us at our best, but we feel like we don't have the ability to stop it. And if that's you, then keep listening because this topic is for you today. Now, for me, I wasn't yelling at my husband. I reacted to anger in a very different way, which I'm going to talk about on next week's podcast episode with my husband. But with my children, I found myself yelling. And this is how I'm going to break it down into a couple of steps for you today. Whether you're yelling at your kids or your husband or your soccer coach or the person next to you, you're driving in front of you, in the car, whoever it is that you're yelling at, if that's not how you want to do it, then take a look today, okay? So here's what happens. We have circumstances in our lives. We have whatever situation it was. So for me, it was my kids, right? And I had a thought that I was not aware of, right? We have our circumstances and then we have our thoughts. And our thoughts are what create our feelings. But most of the time, the thought is subconscious. Most of the time, our thoughts are so ingrained in us that we aren't truly aware that we're thinking them. Okay, we have over 60,000 thoughts a day. We are not aware consciously of every single thought that we have. Our brain runs on patterns, which is great. It makes us very effective. It makes it so that we don't actually have to think about breathing or think about looking to our left. It means we can just do things. We don't have to think about walking. We don't have to think about reaching to grab a pen. We can just grab the pen. Right? Now, at one point when we're just learning how to do those things, think of a baby who's just learning how to do all of these things. They have to really think about it. They have to think about how to close their hands. They have to think about how to reach further. They have to think about how to take a step, how to balance, all of those things. They have to learn and think and use their brain so much more. And it's wonderful that our brain then puts things on patterns, on autopilot, if you will, so that we don't have to use all of that mental energy. It would be so fatiguing, right? Now we can think about other things instead of this. However, sometimes those patterns are not doing us a favor. And when they bring up a lot of emotion, those thought patterns bring up a lot of emotion, like, for example, anger or frustration, then if we don't know how to handle that emotion, then what we end up doing is reacting. Okay, yelling is just a reaction to the emotion that you're feeling. So for me, the emotion that I would feel is frustration, and a reaction to that emotion was me yelling. Okay, now here's the thing about yelling is that it feels really good in the moment. It really does. Because we have this emotion, typically anger or frustration, that are very high energy. They aren't something that makes us want to sit and relax. It's an emotion, it's a vibration in our body that actually creates a lot of movement. It's a very high energy feeling. And so it feels very good to yell because it kind of seems to take the edge off. Does that make sense? However, after it takes the edge off and and that emotion has been replaced by a different one, then that's when the regret comes in. That's when it's producing a result that we don't actually like. We don't actually like that we are now a mom who yells at her kids. We aren't loving that we're a spouse, a wife, that's always yelling at her husband and getting into a fight, right? That's not the relationships that we want. So this is how we change it. I'm going to do it through my own example. This is how I'm going to illustrate this. So first, number one is to become aware that you're doing it and be completely honest with yourself, ladies. Because lying to yourself about whether or not this is happening is not going to get you anywhere. So number one, let's just take an honest look and not make it mean anything about you. One of the reasons that we want to downplay what is happening in our lives is because we take it to mean something about us, right? Rather than it just being an honest reflection and saying, all right, I'm humble enough to recognize that I am yelling at my kids. What we do instead is we say, well, if I admit that, then it means that I'm a bad mom because I yell at my kids. Or we say, I am a mom who yells at her kids. We kind of take that on as part of our identity, right? I'm a terrible wife because I yell at my husband and we get into fights, right? Stuff like that. That is what I want to offer, that we just completely let go of. All of that self-judgment, all of that subconscious desire to take that yelling and make it mean something about you, I want to offer that we just let that go. You can just set that to the side. Your brain's desire to judge yourself and make this mean something about you, let's just let it go. So let's take an honest look. Is there some place in your life where you're yelling and you don't like it? Again, this could be to a coworker, to a boss, to your spouse, probably is where it's coming up for most of you, or your kids, or maybe it's your mother-in-law, whoever it is, or maybe it's a stranger on the internet. Because yelling doesn't have to just be verbal. It can also be via text. It can be via the comment that you make on someone's post on Facebook, right? I really want you to take an honest look. Is this you at your best? Is this who you want to show up as? Okay? So that's the number one, is we have to become aware of it. And then number two is let go of all the self-judgment. Okay? Step number three is going to be recognizing that we can create a little bit of a space. So the first step for me, like I said, was becoming aware that I was yelling. And I could feel like I knew I was yelling at my kids. I could feel myself in the moment, but I didn't know how to stop it. When I put my brain in charge of stopping myself, I worked on focusing on creating a gap. I didn't know how to stop yelling. So what I focused on instead was working on creating a space between myself and my children, so that I didn't yell at them. So when I was in those situations where I felt really frustrated with them, and I knew that what was gonna come next was I was gonna start yelling, I removed myself from the situation. So what that looked like for me is I would be upstairs in the playroom and I would ask all my kids to clean up and nobody would clean up, and I would ask again and nobody would do it, and they were so little, by the way, okay? I had 5 kids in 6 years. They were all very tiny all at once, okay? So of course they didn't want to clean up, but this is what was going on in my head, and I would get really frustrated that they didn't want to clean up, even though I didn't know that was the thought, and I would just start to get really, really frustrated that my house looked a mess and why I was the only one that ever wanted to clean up and blah, 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 blah. And so then I would just start to feel myself build. You guys know this? You guys aware of this feeling? It just starts to build. And as I felt it building, I began to remove myself, and I would just go into my room and I would lock the door. My kids were totally safe and fine. I would close the door and I would lock it, because I did have some kids who were smart enough to unlock doors, and I would just stay in there until I was able to calm down. I mean, it was max like 10 minutes, okay? Again, my kids were safe, don't worry, okay? But I would stay in that room to separate myself from doing the action that I didn't want to do. Does that make sense? You guys with me? So if this is with someone who is also an adult, what I want to offer is that we don't want to make it worse. We don't want to just like, okay, we're having this conversation, let's say it's with your spouse, and you're having and you're getting defensive and you're feeling it the emotion rise up in yourself, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, I know that if I don't stop right now, if I don't remove myself from this room, from this conversation, I'm going to yell. I'm going to lose it, right? And what I want to offer is that in that moment, what we don't want to do is just walk away without informing the other person of what's going on. Because what that will look like to them is that you're just quitting. Or it might look like that you are still fighting, but rather than just yelling, you're just giving them the silent treatment. Okay. And so what I want to offer is that it's totally acceptable to say, let's say to your spouse as the example, I need a minute. Because right now I know that if I keep talking to you, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to yell, and I'm trying really hard not to do that. So I'm going to go into the other room and I'm going to try and calm down. And I will come back when I'm ready. And I don't know how long that will be. It might be 5 minutes. It might be tomorrow. But I'm going to work on calming down so that I can have a conversation with you that is productive and not one that makes us just keep fighting, because that's not what I want. And then you leave the room. Okay. So for me, when I had little kids, I still communicated this to my children. So what I did is I would say, Mama needs a minute. And then I would go in my room and I would lock the door. And then they might come in or knock on the door and say, Mom, I need you. And I would say, Mama needs a minute. I just need a minute. I will be right back. And then they would go wait. Right? And that's totally possible. Again, this is a very clear example of a boundary. If you don't know what a boundary is, you can go listen to previous podcast episodes on boundaries. I've done several of them. That a boundary is something that you put in place to protect yourself emotionally. So right now you're protecting yourself from yourself emotionally. Okay? And it's something that you have 100% control of. So you saying, I'm going to remove myself from the conversation until I calm down is a boundary. They might follow you. And that's okay. They're allowed to follow you. And then you can move again and you can repeat it again. Or maybe it's something you say, I'm going to go for a little bit of a drive. Or I'm going to go into my closet and I'm going to lock the door and I'm not going to let you in because I need to calm down. Okay. So that's what I want to offer, is that you start creating. Number one, we become aware. Number two, we let go of all the self-judgment. Number three is you give your brain the task of paying attention so that you can create the space, start practicing the space, creating a gap between what you're feeling and what you do because of what you're feeling. We want to create a gap between the emotion that you feel and the action that you take when you feel that emotion, right? We're trying to create a gap between the anger and the yelling, okay? So that's what I want to offer. Most of the time, what this will do is just create enough of a space for you to go and for you to calm down a little bit. Okay. Now, then what I want to offer is that after you get really good at that, this is when you can start processing the emotion. And again, if you don't know how to do this, you can come work with me. I'll help you. And especially we'll do this in that anger management masterclass. So join that for sure. Okay. Because the truth is that when you want to stop yelling, what we have to do is change the action that you take when you feel the feeling. Right now, you feel the feeling, and the action that you take is that you yell. And we want to change that action to process the emotion. Right now, you feel anger and you yell. You feel anger and you suppress it until it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, and then everything goes loose. And what we want to do instead is create a space where you can process that emotion. So you sit by yourself when you create that separation, when you go into that room by yourself and you sit and you practice feeling and experiencing that in your body. I did a podcast episode called How to Process Your Emotions. Go listen to it, okay? In that, I go into detail into what that actually entails. You sit with how it feels in your body until it goes away. And the better you get at this, the more you practice this, the more you repeat this pattern of separating yourself from yelling at your husband, you remove yourself from the situation and you process it, the better you're going to be able to get at doing it in the moment. So that you don't actually have to remove yourself from that circumstance. You don't actually have to remove yourself from the conversation. You can actually just process the frustration as it comes up. And then what's really fascinating is once you've processed that emotion, the next step is to give your brain the job of asking yourself, what am I thinking that's creating this feeling? Why do I feel this way? Right? And of course, your brain has a story. And we're not looking for the story, we're looking for the one thought. Because the story is like, well, of course I feel this way. My husband's being a turd and he's lied to me for 15 years and he's addicted to pornography. Like, I'm entitled to be frustrated, right? I completely understand. You're allowed to be mad as long as you want. However, if it's not creating the result that you want, then maybe it's a time we look at it, right? So my brain, when I wanted to stop yelling at my kids, I was like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling so frustrated? And my brain wanted to say, well, of course I'm feeling frustrated. I have 5 kids, 6 years and under. Nobody's picking up. I've stepped on 18 Legos today. The babe, when we leave out this toy, then the baby puts this Barbie shoe in her mouth, and I've told them to pick up the Barbies, and I'm the only one that cleans up, and blah, blah, blah. So of course my brain wants to tell the story. And what I want to offer is we let go of the story and we just open up with curiosity. Okay? And we just say, okay, what's the thought that's creating this feeling? And I promise you, your brain's going to come up with the answer. If you're curious, if you're really open, if you actually want to know, what the thought is that's creating it, your brain will offer it to you. And mine that my brain offered to me was, the thought was that my kids should listen immediately. It first came in the form of a question of like, why don't they just listen right away? That was my thought, okay? Why don't my kids just listen right away? Like instantaneously when I ask them. When I say it's time to pick up with the toys, why don't they just listen right away? And I realized that in that question was the expectation that they should. My kids should stop whatever they're doing immediately when I say it's time to clean up and start cleaning up. And then I realized how ridiculous that sounds. Because I said, of course, they don't want to clean up right away. They're children. My oldest is 6. Of course, they don't want to stop playing with their toys and clean up right away. Of course, they don't want to do that. I'm expecting a behavior of them that I don't even have. Do I always want to get up and clean right away when I know it's time? No. Sometimes I procrastinate a little bit and I stay on my phone a little bit longer. And then I read a book a little bit longer, or I just ignore it for another 5 minutes. And then I go do it. And I realized that I had this subconscious expectation that my kids should behave a certain way. I had a manual, if you will, of their behavior. And once I recognized that, I was able to diffuse my frustration and anger and stop yelling. Now, did that mean that I was all turned into Mary Poppins immediately? No, it did not. Okay? But what it did is it enabled me to actually see what the thought was that was creating the feeling, and then I was able to change the thought on purpose. It took a little bit of work. It didn't mean that I loved doing it every single time, but it did mean that I was able to reduce the amount of emotion that I was feeling, that anger, that frustration that I was feeling, because I changed the thought that was creating it. Does this make sense? So again, let's dive into the steps. Number 1, let's become aware of where you're yelling and be really honest. And again, this might look a little bit different. It might not look verbal. It might look like texting or posting on social media, okay? Commenting and being antagonistic in the group family chat, right? So where are you yelling? Let's identify it. And then let's let go of all the self-judgment. Let's not make it mean anything about you, but let's recognize that maybe you want to change it. Step number 3 is starting to create a space between what you're feeling and what you're doing so that you don't have to yell at whoever you're usually yelling at, okay? Maybe this looks like leaving the family group chat for a while. Like, just take yourself off the list. Delete the app. I promise your husband will let you know if somebody gets divorced or if there's a baby born or whatever. They'll probably just text you personally, okay? It's totally fine. You don't even have to announce it. You can just leave, right? No problem, okay? And then after you've practiced creating that space, then you work on processing the emotion. And after you've processed the emotion, then we can identify the thought that's creating the emotion, and then we can change the thought. That's when we really practice retraining your brain, making sure that those neural pathways get changed permanently so that you don't keep going back to the same pattern. And this is how you stop yelling. Okay, it's not about controlling the other person, because that's what we want to do. Most of the time when we struggle with yelling, our go-to instinct is that, well, I'm only yelling because that person is doing X, Y, and Z. If they didn't do X, Y, and Z, then I wouldn't yell, right? If they just listened the first time, then I wouldn't have to yell. If they just listened the first 12 times I asked nicely, then I wouldn't have to yell it. right? I'm only just speaking from personal experience, right? Or maybe you're thinking, if my husband would actually do what I want him to do, then I wouldn't have to yell at him to get him to do it, right? Or if he just understood, or if, my mother-in-law actually just got her act together and stopped treating me like her therapist, or whatever it is, right? Our brain likes to think that the other person is the thing that needs to change. And I want to offer that it's never about the other person changing. It's all about you, because your thoughts are what's creating your feelings. And your feeling, that anger, is what's creating you reacting to it with yelling. And that's 100% in your control. Okay? If you want to stop yelling, it's totally possible. If you want help with this, come join that anger management masterclass that we're doing August 19th to 21st. Again, the link is in the show notes. I would love to see you there. Bring me with whatever it is that you're struggling with your anger. I will teach you how to diffuse it so that you stop yelling and so that your relationships can start improving today. I love you ladies so much. I'll see you guys next week in a brand new episode. So take care. All right, ladies, if you enjoyed this podcast, then I want to invite you to come join my coaching program. This is where we take everything on the podcast and we actually get to apply it in order to transform your life. And I know that is a big promise, but it's 100% true. On the podcast, it's like learning how to ride a bike. It's like reading a book, an instruction manual via audio on how to ride a bike. And my coaching program is where you actually ride the bike. And that is what creates the transformation. This is what actually enables you to go from point A to point B, to actually create the transformation that you are seeking. If you are feeling stuck, if you are feeling like you are loving everything, but you just can't see the end from where you are now, then I want to help you. Come work with me one-on-one. I have a lifetime access program, which means it doesn't expire. You come work with me. I will help you every step of the way and work with you personally to make sure that you get where you want to go. I can't wait to see you there. Head to my website today, joleneWynn.com, and sign up.